What up, Marsh Pod? Good episode. Excited for this one. I'm going to dive into the winless teams, and we're going to rank them from worst to best in terms of where we think they're gonna end up. Excluding a couple, but because I think there's a lot of question marks about some of these teams that are left winless here as we enter week 3. But first, the big story from yesterday, the news that Mackenzie Mgbako, well, there's a lot of big stories, but I think the biggest one in terms of on-court basketball, Mackenzie Mgbako expected to be removed from the starting lineup for Gotham 5. This comes after a handful of games that he just hasn't really looked engaged at any point in time. And it culminated with the game on Saturday against Run DMV, in which Gotham 5 didn't have a great game. I think that's fair to say. Myron Murray improves to 3-2 against Coach Bilardi. I think Coach Bilardi is like 24-4 against all other teams. So, notable. But the thing about that game was just the complete lack of involvement from Mackenzie Mgbako, and I think that it's finally reached a boiling point in that the team can no longer afford, and this is not for lack of trying on their part, but can no longer afford for him to be so passive on the offensive end. They are building a scheme around Mackenzie Mgbako. They want him to be featured. He entered as the number 2 recruit in the country. He's not going to stay there, obviously. He has a ton of skills, but he has just not showcased any of them as an aggressive piece of the offense to the point that they just need to move in a different direction. They need to move in a spot that has somebody who can get them into sets, that can get them into the system, and that can control the pace of the game. You can make any case you want about this team suffering from having too many good players, but I would counter and say that what is happening in Bay Area is proof of concept that too many good players is not a bad thing. This is a team that has a lot of talent, but Mackenzie Mgbako was supposed to be the leader of it all, and he has not been. They need to find a way to get him involved. If this is a spark that gets him going, that's great, but I think there's more to this than just simply moving out of the starting lineup. I think there's something wrong, and I don't love going in this direction so early in a player's career, but the passivity of Mackenzie Mgbako is far too similar to that of Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons, this recent, revelation that Ben Simmons is not an offensive player has been prevalent for a while. He never really tried to take over games at LSU. They missed the tournament when he was at LSU. When he got to Philadelphia, he never played like the lead ball handler that you would hope from him. He was always just fine with being what he was, despite the many attempts by the Sixers to feature him more. That's a lot of what we've seen from Mackenzie Mgbako. That's concerning. And whether that gets figured out now, if it gets figured out at all, or if it gets figured out at the next level, is still extremely concerning from a prospect upside standpoint. Mackenzie Mgbako just doesn't seem to have it, and I think this is bigger than simply Gotham 5 not being able to get the most out of him. I think this could be a player issue and not a team issue. All right, we've got 6 teams, and there's technically 8 teams without a win, but I've removed Oceania and the North because they're both 0-1 as of Tuesday morning. So we're removing them. That leaves us 6 teams without a win. And so we see the power rankings. We see take top team however you want, but we're starting to get that identification of who's good and who's not. Well, we've got 6 teams without a win that indicates to me they are not good. But I think there's silver linings amongst these that we can look to kind of say, okay, maybe there's a little bit more to this. So we're ranking the 6 teams. We're gonna go from worst to best, okay, in terms of who's the worst bad team and who's the best bad team. All right, so first off, we'll give you the 6 teams. Africa is 0-2. Philadelphia Elite is 0-3. Europe is 0-3. Gulf Coast Lockdown is 0-3. Indy Stripes is 0-2, and Latin America is 0-2. Okay, again, Oceania, the North, we've removed. So we're going to go from 6 to 1. Okay, so we're going to start with our best worst team, and then we're going to go all the way down to our worst team. So our best worst team, number 6, Gulf Coast Lockdown. Look, they're 0-3, but I actually think their 3 losses have been as good as you can make them amidst a coaching change that happened between game 2 and 3. So first loss, they lose by 6 and a comeback by Southeast Select led by Trey Turner. Second game, they lose by 9 in a game that they led by 7, and they just got beaten by Jace Miguez, who had, I think, 13 in the fourth, and Ninny Gibson, who had 12 of his 20 in the third. And in the last game, they lose to Queen City Kings by 4 points in a game. They just went back and forth. So they've shown over the course of the first 3 games, again, all losses, of course, that they are just a quarter away or a point or 2 away from really being 1-2, 2-1. There's a legitimate future, or there was a pathway for this team to be 3-0, but they faltered against Southeast, they faltered against Lone Star, and then they just couldn't make the final push. So I think this isn't a matter of a team being bad. This is a matter of a team not being able and not being aware of how to finish games. That's going to come. I think a stability at the coaching position should help. I think that's a huge boost for them that they go from losing by 6 and 9 in games that they couldn't close out that they led. They get a new coach. Coach Hyman comes in, and they lose by 4 in a game that goes back and forth. That's improvement. So among these 6 teams without a win, I feel the most confident that Gulf Coast Lockdown can make some type of a push moving forward. They're number 6. Number 5, reigning champions Africa. I'm going to hold out hope that Aji Fejbenle can right the ship for Africa. Their 2 losses, 2 points to Middle East, and then 7 to H-Town. Those are fine. Those aren't losses that you look at and say, wow, you got spanked. And every other team on this list has a game in which you can point to and say that's not a game that they should have lost, or it's not a game that they should have lost by that many points. Gulf Coast and Africa both fall under they lost, but it was a close game. So this is still a team that we're going to look at and say, well, they won the championship last year, but it was a super small sample size. That's going to be forever the story of their championship season. And I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to end up repeating because of the fact that they've lost by a combined 9 points in 2 games, but they have given me, aside from Gulf Coast, the most confidence that they can get to a point of relative contention. 500, I think, is doable for Africa. I don't think that, like I said, this is some team that's suddenly going to go on a streak. But you look at the Tropic Division, H-Town Hoopers is 2-0, and we'll get to one of their wins in a moment here. Not the most inspiring of wins in both spots. Latin America is 0-2. I'm kind of jumping around their division. South America, I think, is the best team in that division at 2-0 with Patricio Ramirez and Mike House. They haven't looked awesome in their 2 wins, but they've looked good in their 2 wins. And then Yacht Club and Middle East are 1-1. So I think for Africa, the Tropic Division is just still wide open enough that being at 0-2, they could still make a comeback. All right, number 4, Indy Stripes. They're 0-2. I think their last loss was, to me, the most disheartening one. A major blowout against Beyond the Arch, who I've had my concerns about, who I think there's major reason for pause when you look at that basketball team, but they played well. They played well. Beyond the Arch came out firing, and they beat the heck out of the Indy Stripes. But there's some rotations that just don't make sense to me. Johan Nowajovic is coming off the bench, which is fine if that's how you want to feature him. But in 2 games, he's played 26 minutes and scored 26 points. He is as efficient a scorer as we have in SimWorld Hoops. In the loss to Beyond the Arch, in which it was a close first half, Jovic had 11 points in 10 minutes. He played 2.2 minutes the rest of the game. These are just inexcusable usages of who has proven to be the best player for that team. He needs to be featured more than he has been. Reza Red is coming off the bench, which is fine. Again, if that's how you want your bench, that's a good duo to come off the bench. But when he gets in there, he's sitting outside of the 3-point line. He's not featured in any offensive sets. You're not allowing him to take advantage of his massive frame at 15 years old in the paint. So the game planning for the Indy Stripes right now is concerning to me, to the point that unless that changes, I don't see wins coming. Number 3, Philadelphia Elite. They're 0-3. They've hung around in all 3 games, but they looked bad against Gotham 5. My concern with Philadelphia is when you look at the teams ahead of them, Indy, Africa, Gulf Coast Lockdown, you don't have a guy right now that's shown to be the type of go-to player that those 3 teams have. Philadelphia Elite doesn't have that. If you look at the other 3, Gulf Coast, we're just going to take the top name that comes to mind, De'Aaron Cruz. Africa, Ajay Feshbenlay. Indy Stripes, you got multiple, Johan, Reza Red, Benari James. There's good players on those teams. I'm not saying Philadelphia Elite doesn't have good players, but they don't have the type of top-end talent that makes me think that this can be quickly turned around. Say, okay, we need to feature player X a little bit more. They just haven't shown that. They're also massively lacking in size. I think their biggest players, Lofton at 6'9" or 6'8", and I think he's the only one. Let's confirm that before I start making a fool of myself. Marcus Lofton is 6'9", and then they have Alika Matson at 6'8". Matson's averaging 5.7 minutes per game. And the next biggest is Ayol Singleton, who's averaging 12.3 minutes. So they're not playing anybody of substantial size. And when you're going up against teams in your division like Gotham 5, who has maybe one of the biggest front courts in the league, that's going to be problematic. All right, the second worst team in the league is Europe. Europe has been 0-3. Henrik Vekic has been inefficient in two of their blowouts. They lost their first game in a close game, and he played well, but he was completely inefficient in the last 2 games. That makes me think they don't trust the rest of this roster. I think Kenneth Klum has been very efficient, but he just hasn't been featured as much as he should have been or he could have been in those first 3 games. This all culminates with a blowout loss to the Originators, a very well-coached team, a team that has that type of top-end talent and whose top-end talent played like top-end talent. This is going to be a running thread amongst these teams, and we've already seen it with Philadelphia. If your top guy or your perceived top guy doesn't play like a top guy, that means there's something wrong. And Europe's top guy has not played like it, and or they haven't taken advantage of a guy that might be better than their current number 1. And they've got to find a way to feature some of these better players, like I said, Kenneth Klum, more often. And then the worst team in the league right now is Latin America. They're 0-2. They lost to a fine H-Town team. H-Town's 2-0. I don't sit here and say that gives me a ton of confidence in them. But H-Town needed 34 points in the 4th quarter to rally and win that game against Latin America. Then they go play against South America, and they just get the hide beaten out of them in a game that they didn't look like they even wanted to show up for. And it's at home, your home opener, and South America just absolutely dominated. Edgar Fernandez couldn't get past Carmelo Vega. Edgar Fernandez is supposed to be the best player, the fastest player in SimWorld hoops, and he can't get past Carmelo Vega, who's a good basketball player, but I don't think anyone walked into that game and said, here's the matchup of Edgar Fernandez versus Carmelo Vega. This is the top defensive guy in the league. No, Carmelo Vega's fine, but he's not that guy. He ain't that guy, pal. And Edgar Fernandez could not get past him. He has no dribble moves outside of just straight line drives, and that showed up. And so if this is Latin America saying this is who we're turning to, Edgar Fernandez, fastest guy in SimWorld, well, if he could be the fastest guy end to end, but if you put a ball in his hand and he suddenly forgets how to make a dribble move and can't get past the dude, then you're going to have problems. And they did. It's why I don't think there should be much confidence in them, because they just don't look like a team. And we talked about already with Africa being in that Tropic division, you can't look at SimWorld Latin America and say that they're better than Africa at both of them being 0-2. They're that bad of a basketball team that there's just zero confidence that they're going to figure out a way to turn anything around without substantial changes to the way that they approach this game. Because if you're just going to rely on Edgar Fernandez to do straight line drives, that's going to be a problem. They've got to find ways. The way that they turn it around is featuring more players like JMO, who I think has been underutilized, and has not gotten a ton of opportunities, like JJ Desainez, who had a really, really good game against South America, but it didn't matter because Edgar Fernandez was shooting him out of the game. They haven't featured some of these guys as much as they should be. And that's what's been the problem for this group, is that they just cannot figure out any way to be any type of efficient. We'll be on the call Tuesday night, a good slate of broadcast games. We got Bad Boys versus Cascadia, Beyond the Arch, Heartland Zombies, and then, of course, Reigning Trays in the North. The North trying to get that first win of the season. And some notable games offline. Gotham 5 and SimWorld Atlantis. That's a big divisional matchup. Of course, Gotham 5 coming in 2-1, SimWorld Atlantis 2-0. So that's a game worth watching. And then Gulf Coast Lockdown against ATL against Gulf Coast, trying to get their first win. We'll see if they live up to the number 6th worst billing. We'll be back on Thursday if we don't talk to you, if you don't tune in tonight.